So imagine you're scrolling through your phone late some night and you stumble upon a hidden conversation among people who, could one day run this country. Phrases like, "I love Hitler," jokes about gas chambers, and casual slurs that just make your stomach turn. This isn't some dark corner of the internet. What I'm talking about is a private chat among leaders of the young Republicans, the next generation of the GOP. In this episode, we're pulling back the curtain on what they really say when they think no one's listening. Welcome once again to Your Neighbor on the Left, a podcast where we talk about liberal politics, human decency, and life on the blue side of America's ideological divide. My name is Don Spielis, your host. Boy, oh boy, a lot going on this past week, but nothing quite as disturbing and, to my surprise, polarizing, at least in some circles. Politico got a hold of nearly 3,000 pages of leaked messages between various members of the young Republicans. Now, as we'll discuss in a bit, the young part is a bit misleading, but the bigger issue at hand is the content of many of these exchanges. Outright racial slurs, misogynistic rhetoric, and even an admission at one point from a user that, should the contents of the chat ever get out, they'd be in deep trouble. We're going to take a look at some of the specifics, what it means now and in the future possibly, plus some crazy reactions to the content. But first, let's look at some hot topics. So first up, we'll talk about this past Saturday. The massive No Kings protests that popped up all over the country and even abroad. If you were out there marching or waving a sign, or if you just caught a glimpse on the news, you know it was a big deal. And honestly, in the best way possible. So let's jump right in and unpack what went down, why it mattered, and how it all unfolded so smoothly. First off, a quick recap for anyone who might have missed it or been off the grid a bit. The No Kings movement kicked off back in June, right around the time of that big military parade in D.C. for the Army's 250th anniversary, which also happened to land on President Trump's birthday. Organizers from groups like Indivisible, along with labor unions and a whole bunch of everyday folks, wanted to push back against what they saw as overreach. Things like federal forces showing up in cities, cuts to programs that help working families, and policies that felt like more like top-down control than the democracy that we're all used to. That first round drew millions. Estimates put it at 4 to 6 million people across more than 2,100 events in every state. It was a peaceful statement. America has no kings. Fast forward to this past Saturday, October 18th, and round two was even bigger. Organizers planned over 2,700 rallies, from huge crowds in New York and LA to smaller gatherings in places like Burns, Oregon, or Bryson City, North Carolina. Tiny towns where folks still showed up in droves. By the end of the day, reports were coming in of nearly 7 million participants nationwide, plus solidarity events in Europe, Canada, and Mexico, just for starters. That's not just a protest. That's a chorus of voices reminding everyone that when people come together, real change actually starts to feel possible. Now, what really stands out, and what I think we'll all remember about this, is just how peaceful it all was. Picture this. Millions of people flooding streets in every corner of the country, from the National Mall in D.C. to beaches in San Francisco, and hardly a ripple of trouble. Organizers made it clear from the start, this was not about violence. This was about non-violent action, about celebrating our rights under the First Amendment, not causing chaos. And they delivered. In New York, folks in Statue of Liberty costumes marched through Times Square, waving signs like "No thrones, no crowns," without a single scuffle. In Chicago, Governor J.B. Pritzker joined the crowd, and it stayed upbeat. People chanting, sharing stories, and even handing out water to keep everyone comfortable. Boston Common was packed with families, some in frog and unicorn costumes for the kids, turning it into this joyful mix of serious talk and lighthearted fun. Now, sure, there were a couple of spots where things got tense, like in Denver, where police used pepper balls on a small group that wouldn't disperse after the main rally wrapped up, or isolated moments in Portland with some chemical canisters. But those were absolutely outliers, handled quickly, and they involved just a tiny fraction of the overall turnout. Across the board, law enforcement reported minimal arrests, fewer than 100 nationwide, and most for minor stuff like jaywalking or blocking traffic. No widespread violence, no property damage on any scale, no clashes that spun out of control. Think about that for a second. In a time when we've seen protests turn ugly elsewhere, 7 million people exercise their voices without stepping over the line. It's a testament to what happens when folks focus on the message, defending democracy, protecting rights like healthcare and reproductive freedom, and pushing back against what feels like an erosion of the basics we all count on. And let's not forget the visuals. American flags everywhere, people in red, white, and blue gear, upside down flags as a nod to distress, but handled with care. It was a reminder that patriotism is not owned by one side. It's something we all get to claim when we stand up for what makes this country work for everyone. You know, events like this make me optimistic. They show that when regular people, moms and dads and students, retirees, folks from blue states and red states alike, decide to hit the pavement, they can do it with grace and purpose. One young guy in D.C., Jesus Castro, a college student from California, told reporters it was about stopping the slow strip away of progress we've built over the years. And in Richmond, Virginia, Barbara Hunrath was out there with thousands just wanting to add her voice to the mix. These aren't abstract numbers. They're neighbors saying, hey, this matters to me. In a world that often feels divided, seeing that kind of unity without the drama, it's refreshing. It's hopeful. Now, shifting gears a little, though, it's interesting to see how the response from the right has evolved. Back in June, during the first No Kings wave, there was a lot of, well, nothing. Silence, mostly. Sure, the White House put out a statement about not tolerating violence, but it felt more like a footnote than a full-throated pushback. Trump himself brushed it off in a Fox interview, saying flat out, I'm not a king. Like that simply settled it. But this time around, it's been a different story. Leading up to Saturday, there was a noticeable ramp-up, a deliberate effort to question the whole thing, from the crowd sizes to the very intentions behind it. It's like they decided not to ignore it anymore, but to meet it with head-on skepticism. Take House Speaker Mike Johnson as the prime example. Just days before the rallies, he went on Fox and called the D.C. event a Hate America rally, tying it to what he described as pro-Hamas wing and Antifa people. He even suggested Democrats were selling T-shirts for it and using the protests as an excuse to keep the government shutdown going. Because they, quote, can't face their rabid base, end quote. On Sunday, after the dust settled, Johnson doubled down on ABC, labeling it all as political cover for Democrats or a stunt and a show amid the shutdown fight. He pointed to a supposed rise of Marxism in the Democratic Party and said the irony was thick. If Trump were really a king, the government would be open by now. Other Republicans chimed in too, folks like Representative Zach Nunn predicting more big names would show up, but framing it as Democrats kowtowing to the far left to avoid backlash. And the Trump War Room account, they posted a meme of Trump smirking in a crown right as the DC rally was gearing up. It's a shift, isn't it? From brushing it off to trying to poke holes, questioning if the numbers were inflated, suggesting hidden agendas, or linking it to unrelated hot-button issues. Even after the day went off without a hitch, Johnson defended the Hate America label on ABC, saying it was about the hateful messages and the violent rhetoric he claimed to see in videos. But here's the thing. When you look at the footage, it's families picnicking on the mall, seniors holding We the People banners, and kids learning about their rights. Not exactly the doomsday scenario he painted. I can't help but wonder if this harder line means something deeper. Earlier this year, these protests might have seemed like background noise. Big, but not a direct hit to the agenda. Now, with the government shutdown dragging on, federal workers furloughed or let go, and policies on immigration and federal programs front and center, it feels like the right is treating No Kings as more than a blip. They're pushing back because it looks real, it feels powerful, and yeah, it could signal a growing push against the status quo. Ezra Levin from Indivisible put it well. Republicans see the largest peaceful protest in modern history coming together to call out authoritarian moves, and they're scrambling for ways to counter it. When you go from silence to spotlighting like this, it suggests the message is landing. People are paying attention, showing up, and doing it their way, peacefully and persistently. And that's the beauty of it, right? In a democracy, protests like these aren't about winning shouting matches. They're about reminding everyone that the power still belongs to us, the people. Saturday proved that again. Million strong, zero drama, all heart. Whether you're cheering from the sidelines or lacing up your shoes for the next one, moments like this make you believe in the long game. We've got work to do. Ending that shutdown, protecting our rights, building bridges where we can. But days like October 18th, they light the path. I'm guessing you've heard rumblings about what is happening right now in Congress that's raising serious questions about how our government is supposed to work, and whether partisan politics is getting in the way of basic democratic processes. As of October 20th, there's a newly elected representative from Arizona, Democrat Adelita Grijalva, who's won her seat fair and square, but hasn't been sworn in yet. House Speaker Mike Johnson is refusing to call the House back into session to make that happen. He's pointing to the ongoing government shutdown as a reason. But as we're going to discuss, that excuse doesn't really hold up. The deeper issue seems to be that swearing her in could tip the scales on a sensitive vote about releasing more files related to Jeffrey Epstein, the late financier convicted of so many sex crimes. This isn't just inside baseball. It's about fairness, transparency, and whether one party can block a duly elected official from doing her job. So let's break it down step by step in simple terms so we can see why this matters to all of us. First, a bit of background on who Adelita Grijalva is and how we got here. Back on September 23rd, 2025, there was a special election in Arizona's 7th Congressional District to fill the seat left vacant by the death of her father, Raul, a longtime Democratic congressman. Adelita, who served in the Pima County Board of Supervisors and has a background in education and community advocacy, ran as the Democratic nominee. She faced off against Republican Danielle Gutierrez and won decisively, with about 60% of the vote. This district, which covers parts of Tucson and southern Arizona, has long been a Democratic stronghold, so her win was not a huge surprise. But it's historic. She'll be the first Latina from Arizona to serve in Congress. Her election was certified by Arizona officials on October 14th, and everyone's in agreement. She's the rightful winner. Normally, after someone wins a special election like this, they'd be sworn in pretty quickly, often within days or weeks, so they can start representing their constituents. Swearing in is a straightforward process. The House convenes, the Speaker administers the oath, and the new member gets to work voting on bills, attending committee meetings, and helping with things like disaster relief or constituent services. But here we are, nearly a month later, and Grijalva is still in limbo. She's shown up in Washington ready to go, but Speaker Johnson won't call the House back to make it official. Democrats, including House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries and Arizona's own representative Greg Stanton, have been pushing hard, even threatening legal action if she's not sworn in soon. Arizona Attorney General Chris Mays has joined in, saying this delay is unacceptable and could lead to litigation. Now, Speaker Johnson's main excuse for the holdup is the government shutdown, which started on October 1st and is now in about its 20th day. He's said things like, "We're not going to convene just for that while the government's shut down." And he's dismissed Democratic complaints as political stunts. In a recent press conference, he brushed off the idea of legal action, saying the House will swear her in when the government reopens. The shutdown, for those who need a quick refresher, happened because Congress couldn't agree on funding bills, leading to parts of the federal government, like national parks, some agencies, and paychecks for federal workers, grinding to a halt. It's causing real pain for a lot of people, from furloughed employees to delayed services. But here's where things get questionable. Nothing about the shutdown actually prevents the House from convening to swear in a new member. The House can meet during a shutdown. It's done so before for votes and other business. In fact, during past shutdowns, Congress has continued to operate, holding sessions and even passing resolutions. The Constitution doesn't tie swearing in new members to government funding. It's a separate function of the House. Legal experts and Democrats point out that Johnson could call a pro forma session, a short routine meeting, just for this purpose, without needing to tackle the bigger budget fights. Representative Robert Garcia, a Democrat on the House Oversight Committee, said, quote, "This is unprecedented and unacceptable. The people of Arizona deserve their voice in Congress now," end quote. Republicans have quietly acknowledged that the shutdown isn't a hard barrier, though the party line is holding firm. And let's not forget that of all the people who don't get paid during a shutdown, the House of Representatives is not among them. So if the shutdown isn't the real roadblock, what is going on? This is where the story takes a turn towards something more troubling. The Epstein files. For those who might not remember, Epstein is the wealthy financier who was convicted of sex trafficking and died in prison in 2019 while awaiting trial on more charges. His case involved allegations of abusing underage girls and connections to powerful people across politics, business, and entertainment. Over the years, there has been a push for more transparency, releasing documents like flight logs, meeting schedules, and interviews that could shed light on who knew what and when they knew it. In Congress, the House Oversight Committee has been investigating Epstein's dealings, and they've already released some documents, including ones about his plea deal and interactions with figures like former Labor Secretary Alex Acosta. But Democrats want to go further. They're pushing for a full release of remaining files held by the Justice Department and Epstein's estate. To force this, they've started a discharge petition, which is a tool to bypass leadership and bring a bill straight to the floor for a vote if it gets enough signatures. Specifically, a majority of the House, which right now is 218 members. Right now, that petition has 217 signatures, all from Democrats. Swearing in Grijalva would make her the 218th member of the House, and she's pledged to sign it immediately. That would trigger a forced vote on releasing the files, something Republicans, including Johnson, have resisted adamantly. Johnson has denied that the delay has anything to do with the Epstein files, but the timing is more than suspicious. The petition was gaining steam right around her election, and Democrats like Representative Melanie Stansbury have connected the dots, noting that the House is refusing to release the Epstein files while stalling on her swearing in. Why would Republicans want to block this? The files could reveal embarrassing or damaging information about prominent figures, including some tied to the GOP or even President Trump himself, who had well-known social connections to Epstein in the past. Though Trump has denied any wrongdoing. Releasing them now, during a shutdown and midterm season ramp-up, could create political headaches. But for the public, transparency is key. Victims' advocates and many Americans want the full truth to ensure accountability. By keeping Grijalva out, Johnson maintains the current House count at 217 Democrats and 218 Republicans, or whatever the exact slim majority is, preventing the petition from succeeding. This delay has real consequences. Arizona's 7th district is without full representation during a shutdown, when people might need help with federal benefits or emergencies. Grijalva can't vote on ending the shutdown or other urgent matters. More broadly, it erodes trust in our institutions. If a speaker can block a sworn-in member over a potential vote, what's to stop more gamesmanship? It ties into larger worries about democratic backsliding, like we've discussed before, where power plays override the will of the voters. Look, elections matter because they give people a voice. Grijalva was chosen by her constituents, and delaying her role feels like putting party over people. If this drags on, we may see court challenges or more public pressure. For now, it's a reminder to stay engaged. Call your representatives, follow the news, demand fairness. Democracy works when we all insist on it. Now, here's something that's made some headlines and is stirring up concern, though not enough of either. A new report from a group of former intelligence and national security experts warning that the United States is heading towards authoritarian rule under the current Trump administration. This isn't some opinion piece or political rant. It's a serious assessment put together by people who know what they're talking about. Folks who spent their careers spotting these kinds of dangers in other countries. And now they're turning that same lens on us here at home. If you've been feeling uneasy about recent events like, federal troops in cities or indictments against political opponents, this report might just put words to those worries. So let's break it down so we can all understand what's at stake. First, set the scene. The report is called Accelerating Authoritarian Dynamics, Assessment of Democratic Decline, and it was released on October 16th by a group called The Steady State. These are not activists or politicians. They are over 340 former officers from places like the CIA, the NSA, State Department, and other national security agencies. People like Gail Helt, a former CIA analyst, Stephen Cash, the group's executive director, and Larry Pfeiffer, who spent 2 decades at the NSA. They've seen how democracies crumble abroad, and they're saying the same warning signs are flashing right here in America. They use the same methods they apply to analyze fragile governments overseas, looking at open source info like news reports, public statements, and watchdog analyses to create this intelligence-style assessment. It's a first-of-its-kind look inward, and they emphasize it is not about politics. It is a cold, hard analysis of the facts. The big takeaway? The experts conclude with what they call, quote, moderate to high confidence, that the U.S. is on a path towards something called competitive authoritarianism. Now, that's a fancy term, but let's unpack it simply. It means a system where we still have elections, courts, and the trappings of democracy, but they're twisted and manipulated to keep one person or group in power, weakening the checks and balances that keep things fair. It's not a full dictatorship overnight. It's more like a slow slide where the rules get bent to favor the folks in charge. Think of countries like Hungary or Turkey, where leaders get elected, but then chip away at independent institutions until opposition doesn't stand a chance. The report even draws a comparison to Italy under Benito Mussolini, pointing to things like the blending of religion and state power. And Gail Helt said it best, quote, the speed with which we have devolved away from a fully functioning democracy is startling to me. In most cases, it takes longer than 9 months to get to where we are, end quote. This warning isn't coming out of nowhere. It's based on real actions we've seen since President Trump returned to office. For example, he's pardoned people involved with the January 6th riot who assaulted police officers. He's fired independent watchdogs meant to keep an eye on government wrongdoing. Career officials seen as disloyal have been purged. He's publicly pushed his attorney general to go after political rivals, deployed federal troops to cities against the wishes of local leaders, attacked judges who've ruled against him, threatened universities, and put restrictions on the press. Federal courts have called some of these moves unlawful and unconstitutional, but they keep happening. Just last week, the Justice Department indicted Letitia James, the New York Attorney General, who sued Trump for fraud and charged former FBI Director James Comey, a longtime critic. Trump's also called for jailing Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker and Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, both Democrats, who pushed back against sending federal troops to their city. The report's authors had a tough time even finishing it because things were moving so fast. Stephen Cash said, quote, we would finish a draft and then 5 more things would happen, end quote. They see this as a baseline that might need updates as more developments unfold. And it's not just their opinion. It's echoed by other experts. A September survey from Bright Line Watch, which tracks democracy health, showed public and expert ratings of U.S. democracy at their lowest since 2017. The public gave it a 49 out of 100, experts a 54. International groups like VDEM and Freedom House have also noted declines in things like rule of law and checks on power. Now, let's dive into other key parts of the report. They identify 5 main trends driving this slide, and I'll explain each one without getting too technical. First, executive overreach and weaponizing the state. This is about the president grabbing more power through things like emergency declarations and executive orders. Trump is on pace to issue about 275 executive orders this year, way more than usual, even when his party controls Congress. These aren't just routine. They've tried to end birthright citizenship, limit court injunctions, and scrap regulations without public input. He's also invoked emergency powers to send federal troops to places like California, Oregon, Illinois, and D.C., even when governors said no. And there's talk of using the Insurrection Act more broadly. Plus, reviving Schedule F to make thousands of civil servants at-will employees easier to fire for not being loyal enough. The report ties this to Project 2025 from the Heritage Foundation, which pushes for vetting hires based on ideology. It's about turning neutral government workers into loyalists, which chills whistleblowing and independent advice. Second, erosion of judicial independence. Courts are supposed to be impartial, but the report sees threats like partisan appointments and using the Supreme Court's shadow docket for quick rulings without full debate. There's also non-compliance with court orders, ignoring them or slow-walking them, and intimidation of lawyers and judges. This makes the judiciary look biased towards the executive, narrowing fair justice. Third, legislative weakness. Congress is meant to be a co-equal branch, but it's delegating too much to the president, combined with partisan gridlock. This means less oversight, like not pushing back on executive actions or confirming appointees who might not be qualified. Fourth, manipulation of elections. Beyond gerrymandering and voting restrictions, there's partisan control over how elections are run, intimidating officials, and refusing to accept results. This undermines the idea that elections are free and fair, making people doubt the whole system. Fifth, undermining public trust and civil society. Attacks on the press as fake news, going after academics and watchdogs, spreading disinformation. These things weaken the glue that holds democracy together. The report notes surveys show more Americans okay with a strong leader who skips elections or Congress. That's worrying because it makes people more tolerant of authoritarian moves. All these trends together, they're restructuring our system around personal loyalty, not law. The report warns that without pushback from institutions, civil society and everyday people will keep sliding. It could mean more executive dominance at home and America losing its shine as a democracy beacon abroad. This report really hits home for a lot of us who've been watching these changes with growing alarm. If you're one of those worried folks, worried about authoritarian leanings, maybe you've seen the troops in cities, heard about indictments that feel like payback, or felt the chill on free speech. This assessment reinforces those fears in a big way. These aren't alarmists or partisans. They're experts who've analyzed dictatorships around the world. When they say we're showing the same signs, it's like a doctor confirming a diagnosis that you've suspected. It validates the unease many Americans feel, especially after events like the January 6th pardons or the purging of officials. And it's a call to action. Organized resistance matters. The report even points to this past weekend's No Kings protest as a potential way for the public to push back peacefully, like we've been talking about. Look, democracy isn't something that we should take for granted. It's built on trust, fair values, and everyone playing by them. This report shows how those foundations are cracking. But it also reminds us that it's not too late to shore them up. Talk to your friends and family about it. Get involved locally. Support independent journalism and watchdogs. We are all in this together, and staying informed is the first step. All right, so now it's time to take a look at the story that is as disturbing as it is revealing. The leaked messages from a group chat involving leaders of various young Republican organizations across the country. If you've been following the news, you might have caught the headlines about this, but we're going to break it down so you understand not just what happened, but why it matters to all of us, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, or somewhere in between. Okay, so first, I'll set the stage. Back in mid-October 2025, Politico published an explosive report based on over 2,900 pages of leaked messages from a private Telegram group called Rhetoric War Room. This chat ran from early January to mid-August and involved about a dozen young leaders from young Republican groups in states like New York, Kansas, Arizona, and Vermont. These weren't just random folks. They were chairs, vice chairs, and committee members actively working to take control of the Young Republican National Federation, a big GOP organization for people aged 18 to 40 with about 15,000 members. Their goal? To steer it towards a hardline pro-Donald Trump agenda. The leak came amid some internal drama, including rivalries, accusations of extortion, and even financial troubles in one of the groups. One key figure, Gavin Wax, a Trump administration staffer, was accused of demanding the chat logs to use as leverage. But once these messages hit the public, the focus shifted to the content itself. And folks, it is bad. Really bad. The fallout has been swift. Bipartisan condemnations, firings, suspended organizations, and calls for resignations from within the GOP itself. The New York State Young Republicans were even suspended after a unanimous vote by the National Federation. Now, let's talk about the heart of this, the horrible content of these messages. I want to warn you up front, some of this is graphic and offensive, but it's important that we confront it head on to understand the mindset here. These weren't isolated slips. Racist, anti-Semitic, homophobic, and violent language popped up repeatedly, often mixed right in with their political strategizing. Slurs like the N-word, faggot, retarded were used over 250 times combined. Take Peter Guinta, who was the chair of the New York State Young Republicans at the time. In one exchange about opponents voting against him in the election, he wrote, quote, "Everyone that votes no is going to the gas chamber," end quote. He followed up with, "I'm going to create some of the greatest physiological torture methods known to man. We only want true believers," end quote. Others jumped in. Joe Maligno said, quote, "Can we fix the showers? Gas chambers don't fit the Hitler aesthetic," end quote. And Annie Kekady added, quote, "I'm ready to watch people burn now," end quote. Maligno kept going, quote, "We got to pretend that we like them. Hey, come on in, take a nice shower and relax." Boom, they're dead, end quote. This isn't just edgy banter. It's casual references to the Holocaust, one of the darkest chapters in human history. And it doesn't stop there. Guinta straight up wrote, "Great, I love Hitler. with the smiley face emoji, in response to news about a right-wing candidate winning. Luke Mosiman, chair of the Arizona Young Republicans, suggests making, quote, Nazi edits, end quote, of propaganda videos to smear rivals, and someone replied, quote, oh my God, I love this plan, end quote. Alex Dwyer from Kansas referenced 1488, which is a well-known white supremacist code. 14 for a racist slogan, 88 for Heil Hitler. The racism extended to black people as well. Glinter responded to a question about watching an NBA game by saying, quote, I'd go to the zoo if I wanted to watch monkeys play ball, end quote. William Hendricks, vice chair in Kansas, joked about a black person at a chicken restaurant, quote, would he like some watermelon and Kool-Aid with that? End quote. They called black folks, quote, the watermelon people, end quote, and monkeys. And on slavery, Guinta praised a teen group by saying, quote, they support slavery and all that shit. Mega based, end quote. Then there's the violence and misogyny. Mosiman talked about Spanish colonizers raping women, calling it sex before correcting it to rape, and Bobby Walker replied, epic. Walker used epic for rape again in another context. They even joked about making rivals, quote, unalive themselves, or straight up rape one of them. Anti-Semitic stuff was rampant too. Calling someone a, quote, fat stinky Jew, end quote, or Breonna Douglas saying, quote, expecting the Jew to be honest, end quote. They even said of one person, quote, he also hates the Jews, with a heart emoji, end quote. Now, these are the kind of things that make you wonder, how did people in positions of influence think this was okay, even in private? They knew the risks. One of them even said, quote, if we ever had a leak of this chat, we would all be cooked for real, end quote. But they kept going. Now, one big misconception floating around is that this was just kids being dumb. Vice President J.D. Vance, for instance, tried to brush it off by saying, kids do stupid things, and calling these stupid jokes. He downplayed the bipartisan outrage, shifting focus to other issues, like the Virginia Attorney General race. But let's be clear, these aren't teenagers messing around. The people in this chat are adults, age 24 to 35, chairs of state organizations, staffers for senators and assembly members, even a state senator himself. They're not kids. They are emerging leaders of the party. Calling them kids minimizes the gravity of what they said and does a disservice to actual young people who know better. And here's where the hypocrisy really shines through. Republicans like Vance were quick to dismiss this as harmless joking, but remember how much was made of comments that were made about Charlie Kirk after he was assassinated? There was a concerted effort to get people fired if they made comments not nearly as graphic as the ones in this chat, but that were unsupportive of Charlie Kirk after his death. But now we're supposed to say, kids are kids. And let's not forget the idea that Kirk, the founder of Turning Point, had made his own controversial statements, like questioning whether black pilots are qualified because of diversity initiatives, implying that they're not up to the job based on their race. When Kirk says stuff like that, Republicans often defend it as just asking questions or free speech, and it gets amplified as serious commentary. But when these young Republicans spew outright Nazi admiration and racist slurs, it's stupid jokes. It makes you wonder how anyone actually says that with a straight face. If we're supposed to take someone like Charlie Kirk seriously, and many in the GOP do, then we can't wave away this chat as no big deal. It exposes a pattern. Controversial rhetoric is okay if it's from our side, but condemned otherwise. And this brings us to a bigger point. These messages aren't just isolated ugliness. They offer a window into the philosophy of certain members of the Republican Party today. These young leaders were plotting to restore the young Republicans to a more extreme Trump-aligned vision. They praised Trump for things like suppressing the Epstein files and echoed his style of coarse, divisive talk. Experts point out that this kind of rhetoric has been normalized in the Trump era, where mocking disabilities, spreading conspiracy theories about migrants, or buddying up to controversial figures is par for the course. It's not fringe, it's seeping into the mainstream. And these people, they're the future of the party. They're the ones running for office next, staffing campaigns, and shaping policy. If this is what they say in private, what does that mean for how they're governed? As sociologist Joe Fagan noted, views like these can turn into real policies that affect people's lives. Finally, let's address one of the most glaring hypocrisies. The Republican Party's staunch support for Israel while tolerating, or in this case, engaging in, anti-Semitic rhetoric. The GOP positions itself as Israel's biggest ally, with leaders like Elise Stefanik leading the charge against anti-Semitism on college campuses and elsewhere. Stefanik even endorsed one of the key figures in this chat, Peter Guenta, before the leak. Yet here we have these young Republicans tossing around anti-Semitic tropes like the Jew, being dishonest, calling people fat, stinky Jew, and outright admiring Hitler. How do you square that? After the leak, Stefanik called the comments heinous, anti-Semitic, racist, and unacceptable, and demanded resignations. But she'd been fine associating with these guys before. This isn't just personal hypocrisy, it's party-wide. The GOP condemns anti-Semitism when it's convenient, like blaming Democrats or campus protesters, but when it bubbles up in their own ranks, it's downplayed or ignored. Supporting Israel shouldn't be a shield for this kind of hate at home. Now, I'm not here to say every Republican thinks this way. Far from it. There are plenty of good people in the party who were shocked and spoke out, like New York GOP chair Ed Cox, who said he was shocked and disgusted and that this has no place in the party. But ignoring or minimizing this stuff lets it fester. As average Americans, we deserve better from our leaders, in training or otherwise. This story needs to be a huge reminder that what people say behind closed doors matters, because it shapes who they are and what they'll do if they're ever given power. And now, if you'll allow me, let's end on a high note. Today I want to take a moment, step away from the headlines of division and deadlock, and shine a light on something truly beautiful. A quiet revolution of the heart that's unfolding right now across the country. It's the launch of StoryCorps' 2025 Military Voices Initiative Outreach, a nationwide effort to capture the stories of veterans, active duty service members, and their families. Imagine sitting down with your loved one, a microphone between you, and weaving together the threads of sacrifice, joy, laughter, and unbreakable bonds that make up a life of service. That's what this initiative is all about. Turning whispers of the past into a chorus of inspiration for tomorrow. It's not just about remembering, it's about reigniting the spark of connection that reminds us all why we stand together. So let's take a look at this and let these voices lift us up. If you're not familiar with StoryCorps, picture this. Since 2003, this nonprofit has invited everyday people, over 700,000 of us, from all 50 states to record simple, profound conversations about what matters most. Armed with just a smartphone app or a cozy recording booth, folks sit down for 40 minutes or so, asking questions that peel back the layers of life. These aren't scripted speeches. They're raw, real talks between grandparents and grandkids, strangers turned friends, or families holding space for stories long tucked away. And the magic? Every recording gets archived forever at the American Folklife Center in the Library of Congress. Free for anyone to access. It's like building a living library of humanity, one heartfelt exchange at a time. In a world that often feels too noisy or too numb, StoryCorps reminds us that the simplest act, listening, can heal, unite, and inspire. Now, enter the Military Voices Initiative, a shining gem within StoryCorps that's been going strong since 2013. This isn't some side project. It's a dedicated call to honor the men and women who've worn the uniform and the families who've held the home front steady. Over the years, it's collected more than 3,500 interviews. Veterans from World War II to today's active duty heroes, sharing everything from the thrill of their proudest missions to the quiet fears they carried in the dead of night. But here's what makes it soar. It's not just about the service itself. It's about the family tales, the unsung chapters that weave through deployments, homecomings, and everything in between. These stories of resilience blooming in the cracks, of love letters mailed across oceans, of kids growing up with a parent's boots by the door waiting for that knock that says, "I'm back." It's a celebration of how military life, with all of its challenges, forges bonds that time can't fray. And this year, 2025, it's taking flight in ways that feel like a warm embrace for the whole country. On January 30th, StoryCorps announced their big tour, a cross-country journey partnering with local public media stations and community heroes in cities from coast to coast. We're talking in-person recording booths popping up in places like Washington, D.C., with Got Your Six and the Veterans History Project, Chicago, hand in hand with the Pat Tillman Foundation, Atlanta through Georgia Association to Benefit Veterans, and Los Angeles with the country's Department of Military and Veteran Affairs. Even if you're not near one of those spots, there's a virtual recording booth open to everyone, plus the trusty StoryCorps app that lets you hit record from your kitchen table. Follow them on Facebook or Instagram for the exact information. It's been going on all year, and I believe there is still time to get involved. It's designed to be easy, welcoming, no fancy equipment needed, just you, your conversation partner, and a list of gentle props like, what lessons from your service do you carry into everyday life? Or, tell me about a time laughter pulled you through. What gets me most excited, and I hope it does the same for you, is how this outreach is laser focused on family tales. Those intimate stories that turn history into heart. Think about it. For every veteran who stared down the unknown, there's a spouse mapping out holidays alone, a child learning resilience from a parent's absence, or a parent back home whispering prayers into the wind. This initiative invites all of them to the table. Active service members dreaming of futures yet to unfold, Gold Star families honoring those who didn't make it home, and veterans rediscovering their own voices after years of silence. It's a space where just doing my job transforms into, this is our story, and it's worth telling. And the impact? It's like sunlight breaking through clouds. Participants don't just share, they heal. One mom, Cynthia Alvarez, recorded about her son Daniel, a Marine whose passion for the Corps lit up every room. She called it cathartic and healing, saying it let her pour out her love for him, ensuring his spirit dances on for generations. Quote, "Now everyone knows about Daniel," she beamed. Another pair, Dan Miller and Nick Bennett, sat down together and emerged lighter and prouder. Dan felt like they were crafting something special, not just for themselves, but for every warrior and family coming after. Nick nailed it. Families often get lost in the shuffle. They don't have the resources service members do. This gives us a platform to heal, to help each other. It's a connection in action, turning isolation into a tapestry of shared strength. Let me paint a picture with a couple of these gems from the archive. They're the kind of stories that stick with you, like a favorite song you hum for days. Take Olivia Hooker, one of the first black women to serve in the U.S. Coast Guard during World War II. In 2008, she sat with her goddaughter, Janice Porter, in a StoryCorps booth, her voice steady and sparkling as she recalled enlisting at 19, fixing engines on sandy airfields and defying every doubt thrown her way. "I gained such independence," she shared, her words wrapping around the room like a hug. Olivia passed just months later, but her recording, it lives on, even featured in a 2018 Google Doodle with voices from every branch of service. Or consider Tom Gertis, drafted as an Army medic in Vietnam in 1969. He came home changed, carrying shadows that took decades to name. But in his interview with his daughter Hannah, he opened up about the long road to healing, the friends lost, the nights that wouldn't quiet, the grace of finally saying it aloud. "Talking it out with you," he told her, "it's like letting go of a weight I didn't know I was still hauling." Stories like these aren't relics, they're rocket fuel. They show veterans not as distant heroes, but as neighbors, parents, dreamers, folks whose courage echoes in the laughter of their grandkids or the way a family gathers around the table. And here's where it gets even more inspiring. This isn't happening in a vacuum. In our divided times, with shutdowns, stalling services, and politics pulling us apart, the Military Voices outreach feels like a gentle rebellion of kindness. It's funded in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, with partners like Dignity Memorial stepping up for broadcasts that reach millions on NPR. Local stations in tour cities are weaving these tales into listening events, virtual firesides where civilians and vets chat, laugh, and learn side by side. It's bridging that invisible gap between those who've served and those who haven't, reminding us that gratitude isn't a holiday checkbox. It's a daily practice. As one participant put it after a joint vet-to-vet talk, "I realized I'm not alone in this. None of us are." In a nation wrestling with what unity should look like, these stories whisper, start here, with listening. Let the tales of a medic's steady hands or a family's steadfast love remind us that our differences are the strength in our story. So, if this story I just told you, if it lights a fire, and I hope it does, grab the StoryCorps app today. Download it, pick a veteran in your life, and hit record. If there's no tour city nearby, no problem, the virtual booth is calling. Head to storycorps.org to sign up for events, snag those question prompts, or just browse the archive for a dose of inspiration. Whether you're a vet unboxing memories, or a family member holding space, or a civilian hungry to understand, your voice belongs in this chorus. As StoryCorps says, it's about illuminating the humanity and possibility in us all, one story at a time. And in doing so, we're not just preserving the past, we're powering a future where every sacrifice sparks joy and every silence finds a song. Thanks to everyone who took the time to download and listen to this episode of Your Neighbor on the Left. I am supremely grateful for you giving me your time and attention, and I would love to hear from you for any reason whatsoever. You can reach out to the podcast using any one of the social media platforms that we have. They are all listed on the Linktree page, and the address for the Linktree page is included in the podcast description. We'll be back on Friday with another installment of Back Porch Files. So until then, stay engaged, stay kind, and as always, have the week you'd wish for others.